discipline, judgment, strength. And as we discussed throughout the last few classes, although Gevurah is the act of disciplining, limiting, contracting, but as Chassidus explains, the aim is not to remove, but to reveal. So there's always should be a question within a person who chooses to deliberately contract. What is the purpose of my contraction? What is the purpose for which I would like to contract a certain thought, a word, or an action? Chassidus explains that the first contraction that occurred was the one that occurred when Hashem created the world. That initially, Hashem had to contract his presence in order to give space in which the world, the universe would be created. Because within the confines of infinity, finitude not only cannot exist, the concept doesn't exist. So in order to create the universe, Hashem had to contract his presence. But the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, in discussing this, brings up a terrific parable. When a teacher meets out a lesson plan to deliver to his students, though the lesson plan is there to be able to guide, facilitate learning for the students, nevertheless, it must begin with a contraction. And where does a contraction occur? It occurs within the mind of the teacher himself. First and foremost, the teacher must contract everything that he knows and only leave one focal point that is going to be relevant for the lesson. Then the teacher has to further contract that focal point to be able to meet out to the level of his students. And then further contract it in order to be able to meet out to the particular students. And then the teacher starts delivering the lesson in itself. I'm sorry, first the teacher expands from the very last contraction, the points that are going to be necessary to transmit to the students. And based on that, the lesson plan is formed. And then comes the execution of delivering the lesson to the students themselves. So let's take, for example, when the teacher takes one orange and a second orange and says, class, how much is one orange and another orange? In other words, how much is 1 + 1? But to a novice student, a kindergartner, 1 + 1 is a very lofty concept. And when you really think about it, 1 + 1 is really an abstract concept. In order to teach this concept to a student, the teacher must take one orange and another orange and then put them together in order to teach him what is 1 + 1. When the students absorb the information and then digest it and then really mull over it and internalize it, they're now ready to move on to the next part. And so on and so forth. This process repeats itself throughout the duration of the student's learning. Each time the student is able to take the information and internalize it, it expands their vessel of their minds, and they're able to broaden their understanding, not just factually, but even abstractly. And bit by bit, the student's mind grow to the extent that at some point that student could even surpass the knowledge of his teacher. From that lens, although the entire process technically began with the teacher's desire to transmit information to raise a student, the mechanics of it warranted contraction. Because had the teacher come in and just gave over everything that he knows, for example, 1+1, when you look at 1+1 from a quantum level, it's altogether different, exponentially different than two oranges. But in the first, the second, the third, perhaps a thousandth lesson, the quantum level would be too much for the students. It would overwhelm them. So mechanically, this teacher has to begin with the process of contractions. But when you look at the overall, from the beginning to the end, we do understand one particular point, that the contraction was never there simply to remove, but rather to enhance. So too, the Rebbe explains that initially when Hashem contracted his presence and gave room for the world, it wasn't a contraction for the sake of contraction. It was a contraction for the sake of a exponential revelation that were to occur over time. A process which warranted this contraction in order for it to maintain its course. And in order to be able to, that the process should churn out the desired effect, which is that the world in itself, through the service of the world from the below, will become hospitable for God, for the finitude in itself, which originally could not only exist in reality, could not even exist in concept, but for that finitude to be able to be created and then work through the service of through the prescribed service of Torah and mitzvot in every single time, in every single place, et cetera, in every generation. And slowly over the time of exile, the world in itself, finitude with itself, would be able to withstand deeper and greater revelations to the extent that ultimately, Dira Lob B'Sachtanim, a dwelling place for him, for his essence in the below, practically means that the finitude should be able to host infinity and merges to one and not lose itself. Overall, as we said before, that contraction in itself, the initial contraction and all other subsequent contraction, was never there for a sake of limitation, but a sake of an exponentially greater revelation, an essential revelation. So too, in the course of this week, when we worked on our Midas Gevurah, we examined our characteristics of discipline with the question, what fuels my discipline? So the first place we saw this question being asked was in Chesed Gevurah. The first day of Gevurah, we worked on a Chesed of Gevurah, which means the kindness within discipline. With a question, is my discipline, does it carry kindness? Does it reveal kindness? Am I being disciplined for a true purpose, or is it a discipline for the sake of discipline? Henceforth, we move to Gevurah Shebegevurah, which is discipline of discipline. As we discussed, that means that even when we have to discipline, we must discipline our discipline. We must be able to contract the contraction. In other words, only contract as much as necessary, but no more than that. And then we went to harmony, and then we went to netzach, to tenacity, to grit, to perseverance, and then we went to humility, then we went to connection, and today's Malchus Shebegevurah, does my discipline reveal dignity? When I discipline myself, I discipline others? Does it reveal their ultimate dignity? Because from that perspective, we can say the entire purpose of the discipline was there to be able to reveal and to chisel away the redundancies in order to reveal the actual form, the dignified form, the soul in itself through the body. Well, today we're going to look at it from a different perspective. Today we're going to look at it from a practical perspective. How many times we set, for example, a meeting with a good friend to meet for lunch, and we come promptly to the place where we decided upon, we sit there, and we said for 2 o'clock, and all of a sudden it's 2:10, 2:20, 2:30, not a call, not a, and then 3 o'clock, at a certain point, you start getting frustrated. And then all of a sudden the friend shows up 3:30 without giving any reasoning, without excusing themselves, and say, okay, let's begin. How do we respond to that? How do we respond to times where the plan that we meted out seems to be bamboozled by people who seem to be haphazard? What about our spouses? What about our children? What about our programming? When we set the course and we set the intention and we put in the work and we put in the effort, et cetera, and then people seem to trample on it. How should we look at it from the attribute of Gevurah? Specifically Machus of Gevurah. In order to really understand it, we must first assess the very first Mishnah that we learned this Shabbat afternoon, the previous Shabbat afternoon of Pirkei Avot. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai and transmitted it to Yehoshua. Yehoshua transmitted to the elders. The elders transmitted it to the prophets. And the prophets transmitted to the men of the Great Assembly. So Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, then gave it to his loyal disciple Yehoshua, who brought the Jewish people into Israel. Yehoshua transmitted to the elders. The elders are the judges, the group of judges that each generation, henceforth from Yehoshua, for several hundred years, each generation had a judge presiding over it. Then, from that point, they transmitted to the prophets, beginning with one of the senior prophets, Shmuel the prophet. And that began a whole entire era of prophets. And that era concluded with the destruction of the first temple. And after the story of Purim, the men of the Great Assembly, Nehemiah, Ezra, Mordechai from the story of Purim, ascended into Israel. The second Beit HaMikdash was rebuilt, but the men of the Great Assembly had a charge of reestablishing Judaism to its former glory. So the Mishnah concludes that the prophets transmitted it to the men of the Great Assembly, and the men of the Great Assembly said three things: be deliberate in judgment, erect many students, and make fences for the Torah. Today, we're going to focus on the very first of the teaching of the men of the Great Assembly, as per Pirkei Avot. Have metunin badin. Be patient or deliberate in judgment. First of all, what does it mean to be patient in judgment? What does it mean to be deliberate in judgment? How does one carry out judgment in a deliberate manner? Number two, why is it so important to be deliberate in judgment? Why can't we just judge based on circumstance, based on evidence? What is this extra feat of being deliberate in judgment? You could say judge, judge out of with the truth, out of humility. What does it mean to be deliberate in judgment? And the third question, how can we reveal deliberate judgment within ourselves? On the most surface level, being deliberate, patient, means the ability to control ourselves out of the correct, with the correct mindset, not a frazzled mindset, in a position to just reacting and losing oneself because we're triggered. Generally speaking, there is that patience and deliberance that we're going to learn about before and after. One before, I'm sorry, before and during. One before we were going to judge, and one during the period which we're doing the judging. First and foremost, we're going to focus on the deliberating judgment before we respond. As we discussed, the difference between responding and reacting is a difference between the godly soul and the animal soul. The godly soul responds, the animal soul reacts. But what does it mean? First and foremost, with the course that allows the godly soul to take control of the judgment is to think deliberately before we contract, before we judge, before we discipline. Not just, I see something is wrong, you said something is wrong, I suspect something is wrong, and because of that, I need to gain control, and I need to put my foot down, and I need to speak in a firm way, and so on and so forth. I'll speak in a firm but loving way, and so but still all of it is a reaction. The Rambam, Moshe ben Maimon Hasfaradi, explains that being deliberate in judgment means take your time. Don't be quick with it. Delay it. Delay your judgment. Give yourself more and more time than you originally thought you needed. Don't be quick to make a ruling until you thoroughly understand every single detail of it. Because in giving yourself more time, most likely you're going to be able to see more details. You're going to be able to understand it better than if you would have initially judged and carried it out. Rabbeinu Yonah from Gevurah explains that this actually, the men of the Great Assembly were communicating this teaching to judges and to Rabbanim who mete out the law. And he explains that being deliberate in judgment means don't suffice with the very first thought you have. Although it might be a holy thought based on circumstance and based on evidence, judges are not to depend on the very first conclusion, but rather take that first conclusion based on circumstance, based on evidence, based on everything you know, and wait. Wait. Sleep on it. Mull it over. Give it a few days. Just keep on revisiting that judgment from that assumption or that conclusion from different perspectives. Look at it from a much more refined perspective. In other words, dissect your conclusion. Look at every single piece from another lens. Because as Rabbi Yonah continues, someone who is quick to pass a ruling, someone who is quick to pass a conclusion, is called a criminal. For this reason, a Rav who's going to mete out a ruling, whether halacha or between two people, etc., must sit and debate back and forth with themselves to give time for it to rise upwards and upwards, like lahachmitz, to become like chametz, like just give it time to rise and really think about it. Because when you give it more time and assess it and reassess it and assess the assessment, when you got every single detail 100% accurate and matched it up to the person, to the law, to the circumstance, and so on and so forth. As we learned that later, as we spoke about yesterday, later on in chapter 1, Yeshua ben Prachi says, judge every person favorably, and as the Baal Shem Tov explains, when we judge, means if you're judging a person, you have to judge the entirety, past and present. Past meaning their entire past, including the intergenerational trauma and everything that you know about this person. And how does that match up to the present? So in being deliberate in judgment means that we want to get to the actual point, because discipline must be meted out over here. The only question is, what type of discipline? What needs to be, who needs to be disciplined? Because as Rabbi Yonah concludes, in giving it a second thought, we'll be able to not just explore, but reveal points that perhaps we missed in the first thought. Many times people translate being deliberate in judgment, being patient, means just give it time. Just give it time. Sleep on it. Don't react. Don't be hasty. Sleep on it. And we know in Judaism we have many mitzvot and traditions which develop our patience and deliverance. For example, the most rudimentary level, saying a bracha before eating. Before we eat, we have to think, what are we eating? What is the purpose of eating? What are we going to do with the energy that we're eating? But most practically, what bracha do we have to make? In other words, not just to take and eat and grab and eat like an animal. We have to wait between milk and meat. No matter how much we want, we have to wait. We have to fast. We have to abstain from work for 25 hours during Shabbat, Yom Tov, etc., etc. We know that being patient and being deliberate isn't just the amount of time we spent on it, but the quality of time, not just quantitatively, but the quality that is put into being deliberate. In other words, to really think, to use that time to think and to mull it over, to inspect it from each perspective. We know, for example, in the time of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, the 71 Supreme Court that presided over the Jewish people in the temple era time, if there was a capital punishment case, and the reason why there's 71 judges is because the majority wins, majority rules. So there has to be the extra one deciding over. But what would be the ruling if out of 71, 71 judges come to understand that this person deserves capital punishment, and this is based on Torah and so on and so forth? This is called a mistrial, and it has to start again. Because what are the odds that all 71 will come to the same conclusion? In other words, there was something wrong with the deliverance of the process. We know that in marriage, for example, and marriage advices many times, before you're going to answer, you should answer your spouse when it comes to something that could potentially bring out negativity. Count to 10. Don't be so quick to answer. Especially if a person feels aggravated and, God forbid, angry, wait. Because anger is tantamount to being drunk. And we discussed in our relationship class in last night's podcast that while one is drunk, there's evidence that, when one is angry, the research shows that it's literally tantamount to being drunk. Judges were observed in angry states and being angry in the presiding of their court cases, and were found to it was tantamount to being drunk, because when one is drunk, for example, drunk driving, they see the broader, but they don't see the details. So when we're angry, we tend to focus on the broader strokes rather than the finer details, and we end up missing a lot. Now, of course, this is prudent advice. Don't be so quick to react when in a time of anger. Give it time, give it space, walk away from each other, give it that time. Fine. But even if you counted to 10, even if you slept on it, you haven't come to any different conclusions. We might be less temperamental, but that time doesn't necessarily change our viewpoint, our hurt, our pain. Perhaps it softens our approach, but it's not going to foundationally change the approach. And Memela, even after giving it time, it's only going to affect the external, not the internal. From the Rambam and Rabbi Yonah's explanation, we understand that metinut, that being deliberate, is something altogether. Not just quantitatively, but the qualitative thoughts that we have throughout that time are one of his bonanut, of contemplation, of deep contemplation. We have to go back again and to get to the very bottom, the very depth of the situation. For example, in the course of taking a pause, if the couples feels that they're getting too hot and the things are going to become volatile, therefore they agree to walk away for a certain amount of time, which is healthy. But not just to cool off. That's not the aim. But rather to start thinking and really thinking about what is my spouse's perspective? Where are they really coming from? How did they come to this conclusion? What is it within me that brought it out? Not that I'm blaming me, but I need to understand it better. And once we really, really mold our spouse's perspective, perhaps it's our child's perspective, or it could be anyone's perspective for that matter, but to really come to understand them. Because most of the fights occur because we just we don't understand. And as we discussed in the last relationship class, is born out of ego. I'm right. I know I'm right. I have the evidence. I have the testimony. I have everything. I know I'm right. Right. So though you might be circumstantially right, but essentially there's something more deeper happening here. And as we said many times in a relationship, who cares who's right in the relationship if it's only going to bring destruction for it? The aim is to discover the right path that's going to help the communication and the negotiation and the development, et cetera, of the couple, of the family, of the partners, of the business partners, et cetera, develop holistically. When we take that time, when we take that time off, it's not just to cool off, it's to really assess, because while we engage with heated emotions, as we discuss, the more we communicate those emotions, the deeper we feel it, the more intense they come out, the hotter we become, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there is a need to take that break of pause and to pause the communication for that moment. But in the same time, it's not just to cool off, but to really think. And if we really think holistically at it with empathy and compassion from leverage, as we discussed in last night's podcast, that my spouse, my child, they're good, they want good. So why over here something's not right? That will that will awaken within us the potential for foundational change of view and perspective. So that's being delivered before. In other words, before we come to any conclusion, we have to take that time, assess, reassess, and further reassess the conclusion, the secondary conclusion, match it up to everything that we know about the person's history, about everything good from a place of leverage, not of a place from wanting to be right and condemn the person and emerge a victor here, but rather to be able to come to do the right thing, which is to come closer, or at least to repair the damage, or to remediate and refine the situation. Let's move forward. But there is a secondary type of deliverance, patience, which is less known to the world. At the time of the situation. Once there was a prominent chassid by the name of Isaac of Homo. He was a great rav and a tremendous chassid. And in his shul, he once heard a Jew davening very, very quickly, which was uncharacteristic of davening in those times. And he turned to him, and Rabbi Isaac turned to him and says, "Why are you davening so quickly?" He says, "I'm davening so quickly because to give less space for foreign thoughts to enter my mind while I'm davening. If I daven very quickly, I won't have time to think about anything else." Rabbi Isaac responded back to him, "For foreign thoughts, I'm not sure that hasty davening will help. But in order to produce the positive effects that davening ought to, and better thoughts, and more congruent thoughts, for sure I could tell you that hasty davening will not help." There's an insidious klipa in our generation of hastiness, that we jump from one thing to another. Even if you ever, I've even in listening to songs on the radio and this, I was in the car where somebody was turning the car, and before one song finished or in the middle, he turns to the next one. He already switched to the next one. There is a deliverance during the circumstance. Please don't jump from place to place. But when you're immersed, when you're focused on a certain situation, on a certain concept, be immersed in it 100%, as though nothing else exists. Your entire mindful and emotional focus is upon this particular concept, without having anything else. The previous Rebbe would sometimes sit for 9 hours as a young man, contemplating one particular point of Chassidus. 9 hours, one point. I remember when I worked for Reb David, in accordance to the instruction of my mentor, I started learning a series of discourses from the year 1905. I learned the first discourse once, and I started reviewing it. I got to the halfway point of the first discourse, and I had a particular question, which I felt was a foundational question in the discourse. I came to Reb David and asked him, Reb David, what is the Rebbe explaining over here? What's the difference between this, the way the Rebbe explained over here and over here? And Reb David asked me how many times I learned the discourse. I said, well, this is I went through it one time, and I'm halfway through the second time. He said, when I was in yeshiva, we were taught to learn a discourse 60 times in order to understand it, and 600 times to internalize it. In other words, while many times we go from one discourse to another, from one subject to another, even in Nigunim and Farbrengens. Remember sitting by Rabbi Osher Farbrengen in Tishrei about 23 years ago, and he said when he was in yeshiva as a bacher, they would sing the Nigunim, one nigun, one melody, for an hour, in order to really extract everything from that melody. And he bemoaned that in today's Farbrengens, bachim go from one nigun to another, and therefore they're not getting what they need from the nigun. The nigun is not affecting because they go from one to another. We know that the Rebbe once explained what is haslacha bezman. What does it mean to be successful with time? What's true time management? The Rebbe related that once he came into his father-in-law, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe office, about 30 minutes before the previous Rebbe was to take a wagon to go to the train station in order to travel to a place where he had a very, very important mission. But to his surprise, when our young Rebbe walked into his father-in-law's office, his father-in-law was sitting in front of the table and writing out a discourse as though there's nowhere to go. There's no hurry, and so on and so forth. And he just observed him. And 1 minute before the previous Rebbe was to get onto the wagon, previous Rebbe closed the book, put the quill away, closed the book, took his briefcase, and then went to board the wagon. Says that's time management. In other words, wherever you are, whatever you're focused on, you must be focused on 100% without any background noise of our minds, of anything else. That's called success in time. That's being deliberate during the experience. Whatever experience we're focused on, whatever learning we're focused on, whatever conversation we're focused on, we must be 100% engaged and immersed in it. Otherwise, we're not here, we're not there.
Rabbi, we have a question that just came in from Hannah.
Yeah.
On the chat. She said, what about micromanaging or multitasking?
Multitasking is a fine invention. But in truth, when you're multitasking, you're not focused on this and you're not focused on that. Whatever you're doing right now, you must be 100% focused on. You know, we spoke about one of our Farbrengens. The Frierdiker Rebbe was Farbrengen, Shabbos afternoon, and Mincha, the time of Mincha came about, and the Hasidim didn't want the Frierdiker Rebbe to stop specifically, and there was a question. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, "What time?" He asked him the time, and one of the Hasidim gave an answer to another that there's more time. And he understood that this chassid that said it was Chatzah Fagin. So the Frierdiker Rebbe called him Reb Chatzah, Yechezkel Fagin, and says, Reb Chatzah, listen to me. Or Ein Seif is not a true Metzias. Gilui Etzem, to reveal the essence of God, that's not a real Metzias. Mincha right now is a Metzias. In other words, no matter how lofty, great, like, Ein Seif, Atzmas, there's so much great. No. Right now, this is what needs to be focused on. This is its only reality. Living in the right now means to be immersed 100% in the right now. Thought, speech, and action with our entire metzius, the entire reality. That means being deliberate in the now. Because if we're not deliberate, we're not focused, we're not mining the right now for the sparks that the right now was created for. Maybe we're not achieving holistically everything that needs to be achieved. Okay, so we could achieve 99%, but there's 1% somewhere else. So if we made the achievement was 99%. It means a tremendous loss. And when you think about it, when you really think about this Maisa with the Frierdiker Rebbe Reb Chatzah, when God creates the person, the space, and the time, and converses them, that means that right now, this person has to be right here in their life in order to serve God. Focusing on anything else at that moment in a very abstract manner could be looked at avodah zarah. It's a strange service. Being that Hashem put you here right now, why do you think about anything else? Means that maybe God didn't put me here. Maybe God doesn't reign. Maybe this is not divine. Maybe it means that as much as important as something else is, but right now this is a focus. The Rebbe brings in a sikha the very regarding a assessment of one of our greatest sages, the Rashba, one of the greatest commentators and Rabbanim, and he was part of the Rishonim, the first or Rabbanim of 1,000 years ago, who came after the Talmudic era, after the Gaonim era, etc., etc. The Rashba had a very, very loaded schedule every day. Rabbi would say, and Rabbi explained that, first of all, he would write extensive responsa, which is most of it is printed today. A lot of it is printed. Halachic responsa to people from all around the world, sending questions in halacha. Every day he taught 3 shiurim, 2 of which to the great sages and the lofty rabbis of his generation. And the 3rd shiur was a general shiur in Gemara. In addition to being a prominent Rav, bar none, the Rashba was a doctor. And the Rashba spent time seeing patients every day, as well as doing medical and scientific research. To the extent that even the Chachamei Yisrael, the wise people of Israel, and even the Havdil, the non-Jews, would turn to him with questions. And the cherry on the icing of all this, every day the Rashba would take a walk. He would allow himself time to be able to walk and just be, and just think. In other words, the Rashba's schedule was loaded from early morning to late night. How was he so successful with his time? That's called mitinot. That's called being deliberate with your time. People who say, if only you have 25 hours, that's avodah zarah. God creates 24 hours, as we discussed in meditation, in the art of meditation class, that every one of those hours is an expression of a combination of Hashem's names. So to say 25, what is there, a different name? A different combination that Hashem didn't think about? Chas v'shalom. And the question is, how immersed are we in those hours? How many times do we see, and this is so sad, this is really sad, you see people, couples, families, friends in the restaurant or just walk around and they're talking to each other, but each one is looking at their phone. I came across a meme yesterday. I actually posted it. It's a funny meme, but I posted it anyway. Is this like a couple, they're both sitting on the couch looking at their phone and being individually on their phone, and the caption reads, "Couple is worried that parenthood might interrupt their time to mindlessly scroll their phone." In other words, how much of our lives are we delivered with? Think about the conversations you have. What's the style? Are you focused? You're 100% there. You're looking into each other. Are you really present? Or is your mind here and your heart's there? And then there's the phone pinging every single second. Like, how much of your minutes are you alive? I'll give you an example from myself. Years ago, I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. This is before I lost the weight, etc. But I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. And how was I diagnosed? I went to uh, a sleep study facility, and they hooked me up to like my entire body to different wirings and my everything, and I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, they gave me my results. They say you have approximately 49 episodes per hour, which means out of every hour, I was waking up at least 49 times. And I said, what does that mean? Aside from the fact that I felt groggy throughout the day and coffee didn't help, I said, but what does that really mean? He says, well, it might account for the fact that you're so overweight. Because I completed in my workout. I really work out and I was trying to eat healthy. He said, yeah, but because you're not getting an adequate amount of sleep and your body is not able to go to REM sleep, your body simply does not have the capacity, doesn't have the energy to allow to metabolism. It's basically on survival mode. And therefore, no matter how much energy, how much you eat right away, it doesn't matter. Your body cannot metabolize. It doesn't have the energy to do it. Well, if in sleep that's way, how much more so in while we're awake? How much time do we focus deliberately versus how much time we're on our phones and we're here, our minds are thinking about something else. And so the question is, how much of our life are we actually living? So the Rebbe explains how did the Rashba find the allotted within 24-hour period to write extensive responses to Jewry all around the world, deliver 3 very deep classes with the preparation time that's necessary, as well as to see patients and then to do medical and scientific research and answer questions regarding that medical and scientific research, both to Jews and non-Jews, and have time to be able every day to walk. Says the Rebbe, this is mitinut. This is being deliberate. What does that mean? That in every moment, he was 100% focused and immersed in that moment and nothing else. When that task was done, we put that away, we move forward to the next. This is how he's able to succeed and accomplish in a successful manner every day of his life. When a person acts out of deliberance, with deliberance, and is 100% immersed and focused, then that naturally amps the success rate in what he is immersed in. As there says, hastiness is from Satan, because living in the moment is from Hashem, because this moment is a gift from Hashem. The fact that you're here in this place right now is a gift from Hashem. Satan means that he deviates, he makes you deviate from that moment into another thought, into another emotion, towards something else. Oh, by the way, I need to do, and by the way, I forgot, I forgot this, and I forgot that, and I need to do this. So that moment is not being lived. This is what we were referring to a few lessons ago when we said there are people who look to add more time to their life. Okay, so you add more time to life, and what does that mean? What are you accomplishing with that time? Rather, as the Rebbe always taught, time is not money, time is life. The Rebbe says, the world says that time is money. But the truth is, time is life. Money comes, money goes, but moments will never come back. The Rebbe cited a very famous teaching, Adam doeg al ibud damav ve'eino doeg al ibud yamav. Damam einom ozrim, yamav eino chizrim. Einam chizrim. A person worries about the loss of his revenue, of his finance, but doesn't worry about the loss of his time. Ultimately, his money is not going to help, and the time will never come back. Because we certainly understand what happens when we're hasty in a moment, in decision making, when we're not focused in that experience. We can certainly understand how that kind of reaction, how we could create other issues, because the situation that really being dealt with, you're not fully present in that moment, and therefore it could bring other blockages. For example, everybody knows the morning rush, the mother has to prepare the kids, and the bus is coming, the kid we all know how it feels. You try to hurry up with the coffee or the hot chocolate, and it spills, and now you have to change the clothes, and you have to clean up. Or many times we run out of the house and we forget the keys. We have to come back, or we run out of the house and we forget the documents. The other day, it happened to me. Just the other day, I had to drive to meet someone. It was very, very important. But because before I left the house, I was on the phone with someone, there was this situation that was pressing, and then I ran upstairs to get something. I forgot my phone upstairs, and I started driving, and about 10 minutes into the driving, I realized I don't have my phone. I had to go back and be delayed by another 15 minutes. We could certainly understand how being impatient and hasty, rather than patient and deliberate, is to the detriment of the moment, the detriment of the experience, the detriment of the situation. And and ultimately, and the saddest part is, it takes away from the success of that moment. It takes away from the success of that experience. It takes away from the wholesomeness of the entire endeavor. So we have to think, are we deliberate before and are we deliberate during? And we have to really think about it as we're going throughout the day, and ask ourselves, where am I too hasty? Where do I need to be more focused, more deliberate? Am I deliberate in my conversation with my spouse? Am I deliberate with my conversation with my children, my students, with myself, with Hashem? Am I deliberate in davening and learning? Am I deliberate in my business practices, in my social practices? Am I alive? Am I fully alive? Are my moments alive? We discussed during the course of Shviras HaOmer, one of the general guiding thoughts is each day, and day includes both night and day, and all the moments that make up that day, are they all alive? Do they count? We're going to continue this Imir Hashem tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.